Hello everyone, my name is Andrew Kerr and I am going to use the General Household Survey and show you how to use that so you can think about some economic responses to COVID-19 that the South African government has been thinking about and will hopefully implement. And this is also just a webinar which would be useful for anyone who has some basic data skills but wants to learn a new data set or learn some more skills that might help them improve their data. So it's definitely not only relevant to only people who want to do COVID, and it's not only relevant to people who only want to do the General Household Survey. I'm hopeful that if you just want to learn some more data skills, this will be a useful webinar for you to listen to. So COVID-19 is having a substantial impact, and that includes in South Africa, although thus far the mortality picture is much less severe than in other places around the world. But that's not to say it won't get any worse. So as the economic impact happens, governments are putting in place different policies, and in the developing world, policies are much less involve much less spending than rich countries. South Africa seems to plan to help both small businesses and also the most vulnerable through the child support grant. And that's thanks to a big coalition of people who've come together to put pressure on the government to increase the social grants that are available or already available. So I think that's a good thing. But one of the things we can think about in this that I'm going to think through in this webinar is to realize that the GHS, the General Household Survey, has questions in it and data that, as a result from the respondents, that will help think about who the government can help and who it can help. You don't want to give money to rich people if there's a limited budget. You want to try and get the money to the people who need it most, who are in danger of hunger and not having their basic needs met. And the GHS allows us to investigate those sort of questions. It's not supposed to be, this webinar is not supposed to be an introduction to data. We do offer such courses. There's an online one from Seldrew. You can contact Alison Solier at DataFirst if you're interested in that. But this is for people who've got a basic knowledge of data and want to improve it, and also can do this in a way that's relevant to the current crisis that we're facing. But even if you come to this webinar later, hopefully whenever this crisis is finished, I think that the webinar would still be useful. I've done this fairly quickly, so it's not going to be perfect. Hopefully there are no major errors, but if you do spot one, please let me know. So I'm trying to get people to realize that they can actually do some important work by themselves using microdata that's available on DataFirst. This data set is Statistics South Africa is the producer. They organize the data and do the field work. They share it themselves, the microdata, and they also allow DataFirst to share it too. If you use another stats program, I'm sorry, this is all going to be in Stata. And a group of researchers at Seldrew put together a piece on using actually the National Income Dynamics Study, WAVE 5, to figure out how the government could help and where best that help should be targeted. And so the link that you can see on the screen is to their paper. They've done something similar to me, a little bit more sophisticated in one or two extra pieces of analysis, but what I'm doing is very similar to what those guys are doing. Okay, so at the end of this webinar, I want to get you to the place where you can draw one graph, and that's this one here on the screen. It shows household income decile 1 to 10 on the x-axis, 1 being the poorest 10% of people as determined by their per capita income in their household, and 10 being the richest. The y-axis is the percentage of individuals within each decile. So, and the notes, the different colors of the bars, show you how people get their income, the different sources of their incomes. So what you can immediately see is that the red bars start to become important for the rich, and the blue bars are very important for the very poorest. How do we interpret these? Well, if we look at decile 1 on the very left, we can see that probably 75% of the people on the bottom decile, the poorest 10% of the population, survive on grants only. Their household only gets grant income. There's no other income, no employment, no pension, no remittances. Those 75% get grants only. You can then see that there are a small percentage of people who live in households in the bottom decile where there is at least one formal sector employee. And here, what I'm thinking is that formal sector employees are at least a little bit helped by the fact that most of them would be able to access UIF if they become unemployed. So we're expecting big job losses as a result of the recession from COVID, not just the stay-at-home lockdown, but also the resulting broader economic recession or depression that's going to happen. So formal sector workers might lose their jobs, but in the medium term, in the next 4 months at least, they should be, well, 4 months, 6 months, they should be able to access UIF if they're in the formal sector. The orange bar, again, is those who have informal sector earnings, income. They do work, but they work in the informal sector and they have a grant. And you can see that those people are also concentrated at the bottom of the distribution, mostly in decile 4, but decile 3 and 2 also. So I won't explain the rest of the graph other than to say you can see at the top decile, rich people, the vast majority of the richest 10% all have at least one formal sector employee in their household. And so for those people, we can imagine that they are not as much at risk. Probably they have other wealth and savings. We don't know that. We can't tell that in the survey. But we do know that they have almost all of them have formal sector employees in the household. And so they would be protected at the very least through UIF. I'm sorry, you might have heard my phone WhatsApp making a noise, so I'm going to try and turn that off, but carry on otherwise and not start again. So if you want to create such a graph and think about these issues for South Africa, you would first want to download the GHS microdata. You can do that from South Africa's website, but I work for DataFirst, so I'm going to show you how to do that on DataFirst. You go to the portal and you need to register first if you're not registered already. And that requires someone at DataFirst to approve your registration, and usually that takes less than 24 hours. Once you've done that, you can go to the data portal on our website, go to DataFirst and find your way to the data portal, and you'll see that currently when I did this webinar, there are 489 surveys listed in the site. And what you would do is search for GHS. You can see that over here in the top left, search by keyword, there's the GHS. And you'd find GHS 2018, and that's the data that you would then download. You can download that immediately. You don't need to get that approved by anyone. You can download that immediately once you've registered. The GHS has got lots of questions. There's questions about education, who's in education, what type of education in the household. Remember that the GHS goes out and surveys about 33,000 households, and together that's a nationally representative sample of South Africa, and we can use that sample to say things about the entire population. There are questions about education of household members, health of household members, social security and grant access, who's employed and what type of employment they have, what kind of service delivery the household receives from the state, questions on communication, transport that I've done some work on, food security, agriculture, and importantly for us, household income and expenditure. Okay, and in this webinar, we're going to focus on income and social security, employment a little bit, and where people receive their income from. But as you can see, there's lots of other areas in which the GHS is useful. So, questions are asked both to individuals in the household and the household itself. And usually that means that for the household questions, one person in the household would answer the questions. But for individual level questions, all individuals in the household answer them. So an individual level question is, are you employed? Or do you receive a child support grant? Household level questions are things like, does this household receive remittances from migrants who are living elsewhere? And to use the GHS, we need to use data that's collected both from the household and the individual. And the main reason why we need to use both in this particular webinar is because we're interested in household income. And household income comes from both individuals, people who work, they receive an income, and also households might answer questions about the remittances that they get or other forms of income that they might receive. So we want to be able to see which decile the household members are in, rich or poor. And what we're doing is assuming that households share income, that if there's 5 people in the household who each receive 1,000 Rand, that means there's 5,000 Rand in income. And what we do then is just to say that the per capita income of all these household members is total income divided by total number of members. If there were 5 adults and 5 children, and the 5 adults each got 1,000 Rand in income, that would be a total of 5,000 Rand in income for the household. There are 10 members, and so we say that per capita income is 5,000 divided by 10, and that would give us 500 Rand per capita. So that's how we construct a household measure of income. It's per capita, per person, and we don't adjust for children or elderly or adults. We say everyone just counts as one person. So the GHS asks lots of questions about income. Income from social grants, earnings from work. It also asks household about remittances. Are there migrants who send money back to this household? Migrants who live elsewhere. And it also asks about private pension income. So some elderly people, rich elderly people, wouldn't get any earnings from work. They wouldn't get social income grants. They wouldn't get remittances, but they do get a private pension paid to them through a retirement annuity or a pension fund or something like that. And so there's also questions on that. Those people are not very important. They're at the very top of the income distribution, and there are not many of them, but they are there, and the GHS asks questions about them. Okay, so I've repeated this before. We're going to get a per capita per person income amount. And then we're asking that, going back to that graph that I showed you earlier, we're asking how different households at different levels of income have different types of sources of income. Okay, and it might sound easy, and it is conceptually, but when you come to actually using the GHS data or any data set, it does take some work. And that's the point of this webinar. So, first type of income questions. This is from the GHS 2018 questionnaire, which you can also download on the DataFirst site in the same page, roughly where you got the data. And it asks, does X, person X, receive each of these grants? So, you can see the options: old age grant, disability, child support, care dependency, foster child grant, war veteran grant, and grant in aid. And the really important ones are the first 3. Child support grants at the moment, I think, reach 13 million individuals, so 13 million children receive grants. And then the old age grants and disability grants are also very important. Others are less important. But each person gets asked, do they receive a grant? The next one is income from employment, earnings. So the questions are asked, do you work for a wage or salary or commission or payment in kind? And what's interesting is that it's even for only 1 hour. If you worked for 1 hour in the last week, you're still classified as employed, and you would get asked questions about the amount of income that you received from that work. And then there are questions about the income. So what's their total salary in rands? And if they do give a rand amount, if this is per week or per month or per year. And then some people refuse. They don't want to give their income amount exactly to Statistics South Africa. They're worried about their privacy perhaps, or what would happen to that data. So they get asked then what's called a bracket question. That's 4.3. You can see here. They get asked, well, tell us approximately how much you earn. For example, in the monthly category, it's 1 to 200 Rand a month, or 201 Rand to 500 Rand a month. And then finally, the top bracket is 30,000 Rand or more. Again, people can refuse. And so the question then is, what do we do with people who refuse? They do have income from work, but we don't want to say that it's zero just because they refuse to tell us. And so we have to use a simple imputation method where we make basically an informed guess at their earnings based on other characteristics. For example, how much education they have, their gender, what type of work they do, etc. For example, we'd expect university graduates to earn much more than people with no education at all. And so if both a university graduate and somebody with no education both refuse, we'll know that the university graduate probably earns 10,000 Rand or more, and someone with no education might earn only a few thousand Rand a month. So that's the basics of imputation. We'll get there in a little bit. Here are questions about household income, not to individuals, but first of all, what are the main sources of income? People get asked. Is it salaries from work or income from a business, remittances, pensions, grants, etc.? Okay, and then there's specific questions. 8.10 and 11 are income from remittances and income from pensions. And then finally in 8.14, there's also a question, just one with not very many categories, only 10, asking the total household expenditure. So thus far, all the questions have been on income, but there is one question asking households about their expenditure. This is not a detailed income and expenditure survey where Stats South Africa asks lots of questions about all the expenses of the household. This questionnaire is fairly short. It asks only income questions that we've been through, and then it just asks this one expenditure question, 8.14. Okay, I mentioned this already, but the GHS is a survey. It's not a census, and so there's some uncertainty about the true percentage of people, for example, who rely only on grant income. And in statistics, the way we express the uncertainty is through the standard errors or confidence intervals of any estimates. I'm not going to emphasize this really very much at all, and I'm assuming that you know something about confidence intervals or standard errors, and if you don't, I would suggest that you consult a basic statistics textbook to make sure you do. Because this is a sample, we have to use weights. Again, I'm not going to explain in detail. You should attend a DataFirst course. The complex surveys course takes you through very in detail questions about weighting and sampling. That course usually runs in February, so that would, next time it would run is in 2021. But you can also find lots of resources online about using weights. And so I'm going to use household weights when estimating household level statistics. For example, what proportion of households survive only on social grants, and sometimes person weights. There's a big debate, or a debate, about whether Stats South Africa should even have different person and household level weights, but I'm not going to say anything more about that in this webinar. We're going to use the weights as appropriate. Okay, so I'm going to work with the GHS data, and hopefully that will be useful to you. I'm not going to then spend much more time in this PowerPoint, but I'm actually going to move over to Stata and show you the kinds of things that I'm going to do in the data. I merged together individual and household data, and so that means each row of the data set, think about a spreadsheet, each row will be a person A, person B, and person C, all from household 1, are the first 3 people in the first 3 rows of the data set. But each of those people, A, B, and C, will also have the same household information about all of them. They all live in the same household, so they all have the same per capita income, the same amount of remittance income, the same number of people in their household who might be employed, etc.